Today we're going to explore another fascinating and unlikely story in history, an underdog story that begins in the Arabian Peninsula, where a nomadic group would be unified by a new religion, Islam, that would spread along with the borders of its new empire to experience a golden age in the same time period that Europe was experiencing a dark age. We have already looked at Islam as a religious idea before, and its relationship with Judaism and Christianity. If you need a refresher on any of these concepts, universal religion, ideology, unifying ideology, or caliphate, I recommend you pause the slide here, have a look, jot down some notes, and then press play again. Similarly, this is what we have learned from Unit 2 about Islam as a religious idea. It's a monotheistic religion with roots in Judaism and Christianity that arose through the revelations of the Prophet Muhammad in the Arabian Peninsula. His revelations formed the basis of the Quran, which is the central religious text of Islam. And the key beliefs include the 5 pillars, which we will be referencing today. Today we're going to look at Islam not as a religious idea, but an idea that developed in a specific historical context. The short version of the story is this: Islam, which is a religion, became the ideological foundation for a new empire, a political unit, during the time of Muhammad. If you need to pause the slide here to refresh your memory about Islam, please do so. Today, though, we're going to put this story in historical context where it becomes all the more amazing, in my opinion. So let's start with what we know about the place, Arabia. The story of Islam begins in specifically a place called Mecca in Arabia. And Arabia at this time was kind of a place in between. It was sandwiched between 3 continents and sort of between 2 empires that tended to fight each other often, the Byzantine Empire and the Persian Empire. It's near the birthplace of Judaism and Christianity, and at a crossroads of trade, and so cultural diffusion, lots of trade goes through. At this time, Arabia was very tribal still, and as you'll see on the next slide, Arabia is vast desert. Really take a look at the slide and consider the place. Consider what it might take to live here, the kinds of lifestyles and belief systems that might develop in a place like this. The interior of Arabia, except for the occasional oasis, is a desert. What would it take to survive there? What would people who survive there be good at? How would they live? What would their societies be like? What do you think they would value? In the early stages, Arabia was inhabited mostly by wandering tribes. It was very tribal. But at the time of the rise of Islam, different little parts of Arabia had begun to settle. Mostly, pastoral nomads inhabit Arabia, and the nomadic peoples of the desert are called the Bedouins. Bedouins are mostly shepherds and herdsmen. They continually move with their sheep and camels seeking new pastures. And they are key, as we learned in the last unit, to long-distance trade, because it takes a very specific skill set to be able to survive in and navigate the desert. So we had Bedouins mostly in the desert. And at the time of Muhammad, we had small population centers like Mecca, which was an oasis, begin to develop, where people began to settle. Focusing on this nomadic heritage, though, what do we know about nomadic people? Because they move around from place to place. They take care of each other. We know their virtues. They're hospitable to strangers. They're generous. They respect ties of kinship. Nothing like a settled government is known to them. They cannot accumulate wealth, so there's no huge gap between rich and poor. At the same time, other tribes in the Arabian Peninsula had begun to settle in population centers, making the shift from a nomadic lifestyle to a sedentary one. And this is a transition that we've also learned about before when we studied prehistory, right? When people began to settle, you began to get a power structure, social hierarchy, a little more inequality, and that tribal ethic of taking care of one another begins to erode, and you begin to get more inequality and more individual survival type of societies. We also know that Arabia was at a crossroads of trade and therefore cultural diffusion. Pastoral nomads are key to long distance trade, as we learned in the last unit, and that means also that they are carriers of idea from faraway places. They are the people through which different cultures' ideas mix, and that is hugely important to the story of Islam. And we have this idea of an oasis town that is key to being able to navigate a desert. At some point, you're going to need water. And Mecca was one such place. It was an oasis, so it was a stop-off point for traders. And it also was a place of religious significance because there was a sanctuary there called the Kaaba. The Kaaba was key to life in Mecca. It was a place where the shrines of the different gods of all of these traders were housed so that they could come and worship there, no matter what their religion. It was not uncommon for cities to have shrines to a particular religion at the time, but the Kaaba was a little bit unique because it had multiple religious shrines in it. Why it developed there is part legend, part mystery, but if you can imagine a desert and then seeing a place where water is, it's not too much of a stretch to imagine giving that place some sort of religious significance. People came from all over to pray to their gods there. And because the Middle East is where Judaism and Christianity arose, there were layers of tradition from those Abrahamic faiths woven into Arabia already, and certainly, around the ethos of Mecca. So we have Mecca during the time of Muhammad. And I have to recommend a book while I'm here. No God But God by Reza Aslan is where I'm getting a lot of my source material, and it is fantastically written if you're interested in this history. Mecca was beginning to become an important place when Muhammad lived. Trade was modest, but the shrine became central to the economy of the region because you had to pay a tax once you entered the city and to enter the shrine. To get to the life of Muhammad, Muhammad was from Mecca, and he was a member actually of the really important tribe that controlled Mecca. But he was an orphan in a time and a place where family ties were everything. He was lucky. His uncle employed him to be a caravan trader, so he would have traveled and he would have encountered Christians and Jews along his trade travels. But he would have been an outcast of the society as an orphan because, again, family protection was everything. And he would have been very lucky to have been given this job by an uncle, and he knew it. The economy of Mecca at the time was tied to the Kaaba, a universal shrine. So traders of many different religions could go there, worship, trade, and pay that tax money to that all-important tribe that controlled the Kaaba and therefore the city. The tribe that controlled this shrine controlled the economy of the city, and that money depended on the existence of many gods. Yet not everybody from Mecca benefited from this system. Nomad life, tribal life, traditionally, prevented the social and economic hierarchies that were so prevalent in sedentary societies like Mecca. The only way to survive in a tribal, nomadic community, as we learned before, where movement was the norm and material accumulation was impractical, was to maintain a strong sense of tribal solidarity by sharing all available resources. That tribal ethic was founded on the idea that every individual was necessary, was key, important to protect. This is not the ethic that was developing in Mecca. In Mecca, we began to get a lot of inequality, rich, very poor. And the poor, the orphans, the outcasts of this society were in a relatively hopeless position. Enter Muhammad. Muhammad, like I said, had been lucky to be given this job as a caravan trader by his uncle. If not for that, who knows what would have happened. He was further lucky later on in his life to have married well. And by the time he was 40, he was in a relatively good position in the society where really by all existing rules, he should have not survived. He knew this though. He knew that he was lucky. And through his adult life, he, gave to charity, he gave to the poor. That was something that was really important to him. And the contradiction between his position in life, which was relatively privileged now, and where he knew he should have been, began to weigh on him. And so, 40 years old is the right time to start thinking about these big, big questions in life. And Muhammad did. He'd go out into the desert and he'd meditate. In this process, the story goes, he received a revelation, and that revelation became the basis of this religion, Islam. Now, I've given you all of this context because it's important for you to understand how we get from an idea to an empire and why the idea was so threatening to people. Islam, if you remember back to when we talked about the key beliefs, it includes a belief about taking care of the poor, taking care of orphans, and the central belief, there is no God but God, and Muhammad is his prophet. There is one God only. Both of these beliefs would have been a gigantic threat to the economy of Mecca. If there is only one God, we lose all of the tax money from people who come to worship to the many, many, many gods that we have shrines in our Kaaba for. If we have to take care of the poor, then our privileged position in society is wrong. That is a threat to our privilege, and people tend to like their privilege, right? We know that from our lives. So the interesting thing about Islam to me personally is kind of like Christianity, like this initial revolutionary message about taking care of the poor. And here I'm going to read to you from a little bit of that book I recommended a second ago. In the strongest terms, Muhammad decried the mistreatment and exploitation of the weak and unprotected. He called for an end to false contracts and the practice of usury that had made slaves of the poor. He spoke of the rights of the underprivileged and the oppressed, and made the astonishing claim that it was the duty of the rich and the powerful to take care of them. Do not oppress the orphan, the Quran commands, and do not drive away the beggar. More than anything else, Muhammad considered himself a warner carrying a message for those in his community who continued to abuse the orphan, who did not induce others to feed the needy, who prayed to the gods while remaining oblivious to their moral duties, and who withheld things of common use from others. His message was simple. The day of judgment was coming, when the sky will be cleft asunder and the earth shall be leveled, and those who did not free the slave or feed others in times of famine would be engulfed in fire. This was a radical message, one that had never been heard before in Mecca. Muhammad was calling for sweeping social reform. He was demanding economic justice. This was revolutionary, coupled with the claim, there is no God but God, there is one God. Muhammad is his final prophet, believing himself to be in the line of Abraham from Judaism and Jesus Christ from Christianity as well. As a giant threat to the economy of the region, immediately this religion was persecuted. Not only was it a threat to the people of Mecca, but in addition, the existence of those two really powerful empires just off the border of Arabia presented enough of a threat combined that Muhammad's idea, which was, gaining some traction, as you could imagine, among the poor and the orphans of society, could be wiped out. To protect the religion, Islam, amazingly, Muhammad managed to create a state, the Islamic Empire. This is a fascinating process that you guys are going to learn about, for sure, today in your classwork. But I wanted to set the context so you'll understand, both why the idea is important and why it gives rise to a state immediately. This is what sets Islam apart from the history of Christianity, for example. Muhammad was not just the founder of a religion, but the founder, political leader, and head of a state. And that state grew. If you look at the map, the darker orange shows you how far Islam and the empire spread during the lifetime of Muhammad. Not too shabby for an orphan trader, for sure. But then look at the lighter orange. The empire spread like wildfire for reasons that we will get to tomorrow. And the success of the empire, in addition to its policies of tolerance for other Abrahamic religions, led to the fantastic spread of the religion. So we get to our key points for the day. The rise of Islam gave way to an empire stretching across 3 continents. Huge, hugely successful. We'll see why tomorrow. So Muhammad was both a religious and a political leader. He established the religion Islam and also a state, sometimes referred to as the Arab Empire because it began in Arabia and spread from there, sometimes referred to as the Islamic Empire because Islam, this religion, formed the unifying ideology, the idea that kind of glued everybody together into this empire. He united the Arabian Peninsula under the one state with one religion, and then the empire spread and the religion spread with it. When Muhammad died, this new empire found itself without a spiritual or a political leader, and that, as you can imagine, causes a pretty big problem. So there was conflict over who would take over next. And this conflict led to a permanent division in the Islamic community that continues to cause problems in the Middle East today. Some people believed that anyone who followed Muhammad's example could be caliph, could be the head of the empire and the religion. That group would be the Sunni Muslims. Shia Muslims, on the other hand, believe that caliphs must be descended from Muhammad. And that disagreement continues to cause problems in the Middle East in ways that we will explore in classwork down the line. I keep using the word caliph. That's one that you should probably write down too. The leader of the Arab Empire following Muhammad's death was called the caliph, and they presided over religious, political, and military affairs. The empire became known as a caliphate. So caliphate is the specific name for empire, specifically when we're talking about the Islamic State. And finally, if you'd like a preview of where we are going from the story, or if you're building your own concept map as we go, you can pause the slide here and kind of take a look at the big picture. We started in the middle. Muhammad as prophet for the religion Islam and the founder of the political unit, the Caliphate, the Arab Empire. Tomorrow, we'll be looking at how both the religion and the empire spread quite as fast as they did.